Chapter 28, Bleeding Heart Pugilist. Reeling in one's enemy with the attractive force of the Banzhou Tenin, heavenly attraction of all creation? A good idea for Uzumaki Naruto. He was the kind of guy that liked to get up close and personal in order to maul his opponent, and with what he had seen of Ikamaru Jin's Shirkai, it was more than likely for the best that he kept the battle close. Until the last use of the aforementioned jutsu didn't prevent Jin from unleashing his vaunted Shirkai, with him coming right towards Naruto, his blade extending forward like a bullet fired from the chamber of a rifle. With no time to dodge, Jin grinned as he saw blood fly through the air, proof positive that he had indeed stabbed Naruto through. His grin slipped a bit when he saw exactly where he had stabbed him. Well, I'll be damned. I missed? No. I just slowed it down a bit. Naruto replied with a bit of a strain in his voice. He was holding both of his hands out forward, one posted in front of the other. Both were stabbed clean through by Jin's Zanpakuto, but behind them Naruto's vital spots had not been hit. He had managed to move his body to get stabbed in the area just where his shoulder and chest met. He was fine in the grand scheme of things. Your aim sucks. He joked, maybe you should open your eyes next time. Jin's Zanpakuto retracted and he spared a bit of a chuckle. Most people would be more concerned with a wound like that, but you're here cracking wise with holes in your hands and chest. I like that. Naruto returned his sentiment with a laugh, but concealed his hands from view in the loose sleeves of his sage coat so that Jin couldn't see them twitch. Great. Good thing I'm in sage mode, so this won't slow my hand seals down by too much. Jin's Ryatsu was smothering in how it permeated the area. The power was incredible. This was definitely a Shinigami captain. You're a weird guy. I don't know what to make of you. Meh, thinking too hard doesn't really get you anywhere. Why bother? Jin tossed his Zanpakuto in his hand before shooting it out at Naruto again. Ikaros, Shinso, shoot to kill, God Spear. Ducking the attack and losing a few stray blonde hairs for his trouble, Naruto decided that being far away was really not a strategy worth trying to work out and headed in to pound Jin's skull in. As a method of cover, Naruto's right hand turned into something of a laser cannon that he charged up before blasting pure chakra at his silver-haired foe. The sheer heat from the blast was felt by Jin enough to singe him slightly even though he was able to dodge and avoid the move. There was plenty of sky to maneuver around in, and he had noticed that while Naruto was speedy on the ground and he wasn't a slouch in the air either, he was slower up there. What are you, some kind of cyborg or something? Or something. Naruto said dryly as his arm compounded back to normal as if it hadn't looked like a futuristic weapon just a moment ago. This isn't a good place for a fight like this, you know. He said as he got in close as Jin's Zanpakuto retracted once more. Having felt just how good Naruto's taijutsu was when it came to hitting an opponent without even needing to touch them, Jin quickly backpedaled and used Shuinpa to leave his range in its entirety. I know. I saw you fight Yamamoto Soteishu back at the Tsukioku. We need a good few square miles if we really want to fight, so why don't we just stop? He said, immediately sheathing his Zanpakuto. That wasn't what Naruto had been expecting. This was a bad guy, wasn't it? Bad guys usually didn't give a flip about how much property damage they would cause during any kind of battle. At least that was his experience with going head-to-head against his own foes. Jin seemingly answered Naruto's unasked question with a shrug. A fight with you to the finish would just end up getting too many Karakura town citizens killed. We need every soul we can get to form the Uken, King's Key, remember? We'd definitely wind up taking out at least 1,000 by accident. His grin then grew as he seemingly saw something behind Naruto that was amusing. Watch your back now. Naruto's awareness while in sage mode allowed him to feel the massive amounts of Ryatsu behind the attack coming all the way, and he simply slipped out of its path, catching a hand that moved past him that had been intending to pierce straight through his chest. How brutally simple. And such a simple childlike approach to attacking of course came from the strange child that had been accompanying Jin to the battlefield, the Wonder Weiss kid. Even though Naruto had caught his attack, Wonder Weiss didn't seem to care at all, still with that same vapid expression on his face that never seemed to change. Awawa? You might as well just hit him. Mercy for a child isn't going to do you much good here. Jin said with a hapless shrug. Wonder Weiss doesn't have any rationale, memory, any kind of intelligence really. He's a shell. And he will kill you, just so you know. Naruto saw a gleam of activity in the eyes of Wonder Weiss and threw him preemptively as he started forming a purple zero at his mouth. Heads up. Jin joked as he caught Wonder Weiss in one hand by his uniform as the child sailed overhead. That is one strong kid. Naruto pointed out as Wonder Weiss had power within him that could put most of the Shinigami he had sensed in the Siriidii to shame. He had to stop and stare with his Rinnegan eyes at him. How old is he? He can't be any older than 10 years old. As an Arrancar he's more like a month old. Jin said with his ever-present grin still plastered on his face as he could see the twitch of surprise on Naruto's. Scary, ain't it? An Arrancar's ability to fight is natural. Instinctual, kind of like their hollow abilities. Yep, I can say that Aizen-san really didn't screw up using the Hugyoku on hollow powers this time. He's still saying he screwed up on us, is he? Both Naruto and Jin looked directly up in the sky above them to see Shinji floating upside down coolly as he used one hand to hold his newsboy cap on his short-cut blonde hair. That was weird. Now that he was there, Naruto could sense him, but before that he hadn't felt his presence. The effects of having Jin's Ryatsu fill the area, he surmised. The new arrival of the visored warrior did nothing to remove Jin's smile from his face. If anything, he looked as if he had just seen an old friend after many years. Ah, this party's certainly starting to fill up, isn't it? Hirako-san, how are things? Just great. Shinji said cheerfully, I love being in exile from the Soul Society for over 100 years doing nothing in a warehouse at the edge of Karakura. Do you have any idea how boring it is in this town? Things are just now starting to get interesting, but nothing ever happened here before this. I met this guy though, so that's something. He said, pointing towards Naruto without even looking at him. I can only wonder how bored he usually is, what with the immortality and all. Yeah, but it helps when I invest in things though. Naruto chimed in with a shrug to defend his ongoing existence. Do you know how much money I've made on inventions and businesses in the last 120 years? If he had to compare it to something, his life was kind of like watching a mediocre TV series that every so often would have something amazing happen that would blow you away. You stayed hooked in just for those particular moments. Anyway, Shurji righted himself in the air and gave an emotionless gaze that was sent Jin's way. I came to see what all the hubbub was about tonight. Don't you people know that others are trying to sleep? Go flare your Ryatsu in the mountains or something where sensible, spiritually aware folks can't feel it. It's like an earthquake. Sorry. My bad. Wooag. Wonder why says he sorry. I think. Shaking his head, Shinji lowered himself down to the level of altitude that Jin and Naruto were at. No, don't be. This seems pretty interesting after all. I didn't think I'd actually run into one of you three here, Jin. What a wonderful surprise. I just love seeing the sights and the nightlife, you know? Jin's joke wasn't well received apparently, as he then had to quickly draw his sword to block Shinji's quickly drawn Zanpakudo. Not a fan. Naruto just stared in shock as he watched Shinji and Jin begin to streak across the sky with the sound of blades clashing ringing out. Did Shinji just step in and take his fight right from under his nose? Of all the inconsiderate, did anyone he was acquainted with actually show him respect? Honestly. Although to be honest, Shinji had more of a reason to fight with Jin than he did, so in that regard he couldn't blame his fellow blonde for getting all riled up. If Aizen were there, the entire visored warehouse hideout probably would have cleared out. Turning his head, Naruto once again found himself in the company of the dull Wonderweiss Margera, who was giving him the equivalent of a 1,000-yard stare with his mouth hanging open. Who the hell brought a guy, kid, Arrancar, or whatever, like him to fight a battle? That seemed completely asinine. He still had to keep an eye on him though. The second he let Wonderweiss out of his sight, that would be when he started trying to kick his ass like the first time. And he didn't want to fight a child, no way no how. Not like this. An Arrancar child was still a child. Yeah, he was such a bleeding heart good guy. But he'd made it that far being the way he was, so why change? Shinji clearly had a bone to pick with Jin, hence why the battle all across the sky was continuing to rage without surcease. With the output of Ryatsu coming from the two at every instance, it didn't seem like either was going to give any quarter. And since Naruto refused to fight Wonderweiss, that just left hanging out with Wonderweiss. So, what's up? Triple X. Haiden vs. Luppy. Yusuak. An extremely battered and bloodied Haiden bellowed at Luppy, still being restrained by the Arrancar's tentacles that came with his resurrection. For the 100th time it seemed, he then received a barrage of shots to the head and body from the other remaining 4 extra appendages. Wow, I know they're colored like marshmallows, but that doesn't mean that the blows from them have to feel like it too. Luppy was getting more and more annoyed. He was strong, he knew he was. When he hit something, especially in Resurrection, it was going to break, no questions asked. So why wouldn't this ignorant fool crumble? Why wouldn't he go limp and just die? He was cracking jokes, antagonizing Luppy to hit harder and harder and grinning manically all the while. Why don't you just curl up and die already? A sneer was on Luppy's effeminate face as his breath started coming out heavier and heavier. Landing haymaker after haymaker was taxing. His hierro can't be that strong. I'm hurting him badly, I know I am. And why wasn't he using his resurrection to escape? What did his resurrection even do? You're not gonna cry, are you? Haydn said with a bloody smirk. Your mascara will run if you do that. Another shot to the head got him to start cackling wildly. Ha! Sensitive are we? Just like a WOM dash. His words choked in his throat as Luppy began to strangle him with a tentacle. Why didn't he just do that from the start? That certainly shut Haydn up. Sweet silence filled Luppy's ears as he continued to choke the life out of Haydn. He'd get to enjoy draining the life right from him. Maybe he could even squeeze hard enough to break his neck. That would really be something. Wait, he wasn't struggling for air. He was just grinning at him still. Even when Luppy tried tightening his grip further, he got nothing out of it. It's like wearing a really uncomfortable tie. Haydn quipped as Luppy kept trying to strangle the life out of him. The silver-haired devil then leaned his head forward far enough to seize a portion of Luppy's outstretched tentacle in his teeth as he began carnivorously ripping and tearing at it as if he were a coyote biting off its own leg in a trap. It wasn't the normal portion that Luppy had been beating him with, so even with hierro it wasn't as hard as the normal part. Despite the humanoid appearance, an Arrancar was still a hollow at heart. This still didn't make it any less shocking to see Haydn use his teeth to free his neck from Luppy's tentacle. But that put another thought to mind. Luppy's tentacles were hard enough to be considered lethal weapons, and Haydn had just bitten through one. So that begged the question of just how hard was his hierro? Even if he hadn't bitten through the toughest part of the tentacle, he had still ripped right through it with his teeth. Didn't you ever learn not to play with your prey when you're hunting? Haydn said, managing to flex his wrist about despite still being bound by Luppy. This allowed him to aim his hand in Luppy's direction as a purple energy blast began to form in it. Sometimes what you're after can kill you right back. Zero, hollow flash. Luppy's eyes widened and he shielded himself as best he could with his remaining 3 free tentacles when the blast collided with him, but he still suffered noticeable injury and seethed at Haydn, who had been freed in Luppy's shock of him so casually firing his zero. Luppy then realized that his tentacles had helped him fire it as they had anchored him to his position so that he wasn't blown back from the force of the blast. That was why it looked so casual. Ha! Luppy laughed off the light wounds dealt to his person as he lorded his 7 remaining tentacles over Haydn. This doesn't change anything. You're a complete mess right now. Compared to you, I'm barely scratched. You're supposed to be the 8th strongest, right? Confusion flew across Luppy's face at Haydn's question. How random. What did it matter really? Yes, idiot. That's the meaning of being the Octava Espada. It means I'm the 8th most powerful Arrancar in Aizen-sama's army. Damn. Haydn cursed as he wiped his own blood from his face. Uzumaki brat killed the last Octava Espada. I thought I would at least get to kill one that was stronger than the one he got to kill. That wimpy weird scientist one. But you don't seem to be that much stronger, if you even are any stronger. You don't hit like you are. Narrowing his eyes on Haydn's form, Luppy's tentacles waved around, showing the irritation that he wouldn't let show on his face or in his conscious actions. What are you saying? I let you catch me like that, dumbass, so I could see just how strong you were. You lie. It doesn't matter what you believe when you're dead, so think whatever you want. Shut up. Luppy lifted his tentacles with an insane look on his face and pointed them at Haydn, red beams forming on the tips of them. Prisma Tentaculo Zero, Prism Tentacle Zero. Focusing them all into one beam, he blasted a focused thin laser of a zero at Haydn. Not anticipating just how fast it would be in comparison to every zero he had seen in the past, Haydn wasn't allowed enough time to dodge and wound up getting wounded straight through his stomach, much to his surprise. Gah. Not bad. It shot clean through him. It was definitely right up there with the single fastest attacks he had ever seen. It was especially up there in one of the ones he ever had the misfortune to feel. Far faster than even a bala. There just wasn't any comparison in speed. I know. Luppy seemed quite pleased with himself and began to laugh as once again the battle seemed well in hand for him. You had me all flustered and forgetting my technique just so I could hurt you and make you eat those words and your own blood as well, but I wasn't thinking. Sorry, but I'm through with you, so do me a favor and just pass on. Hierro Virgin, Iron Maiden. Luppy's tentacles grew spikes on the ends of them, making them far more wicked weapons for battering his foes than before. If they could crush before, now they could crush, impale, and shred a flesh and blood body like cheese. Bad news for Haydn. Not good enough either. Haydn muttered lowly as Luppy sent his tentacles out his way to try and render him to hamburger. Holding up his scythe he death-dueled against the 7 remaining appendages. Even with your little spiked tentacles, you're tired. Impossible. Luppy's eye began to twitch at the sight of the injured Haydn still with enough physical strength to beat back all 7 of his tentacles. He's not even in his resurrection. I train with a guy that can make dozens of himself. 7 stupid tentacles aren't enough to slow me down. Yeah, he was in pain, but none of it was really debilitating. The laser Zero wound went through him so quickly that it cauterized itself, and if it hadn't killed him on impact it wasn't going to kill him at all. Don't tell me this is the best you've got. His brazen statement turned Luppy's trepidation to anger. Why was Haydn so strong? Only an Arrancar made via Aizen's Hugyoku could have such incredible potential. All other naturally formed Arrancar were far weaker than him. It didn't make sense. He didn't know, and Haydn didn't care enough to bring attention to the fact that he had indeed become an Arrancar within the presence of Aizen and the Hugyoku, somehow activating it with his sheer will to defy Aizen's wish to use his power for his own devices. Retracting his tentacles back to their normal length, Luppy watched Haydn barrel right towards him. The ignorant brute. Was going forward all he knew how to do? Someone was certainly in touch with their hollow instincts, la hélice, the propeller. Stopping short of running into Luppy doing his best impression of a helicopter, Haydn channeled energy to his fists and began blasting away with repeated bala attacks, but the whirling action of Luppy's tentacles deflected each speedy bullet sent his way. Eventually the extra appendages extended and went out towards Haydn as he dodged skillfully. Gritting his teeth as he was tired of Luppy's roundabout way of attacking, Haydn started returning fire and hacking his way against Luppy's special attack like some kind of crazed anarchist until he managed to get close enough to cut at his actual body directly. The reckless berserker attack had positive results for Haydn as he managed to slice Luppy's entire right arm off. Not bad. The bloodshed was a mighty worthwhile payoff after an entire battle that tested Haydn's crappy excuse for patience. It was almost therapeutic to watch the limb fall from Luppy's body in the sky to the ground below. Did that really just happen? Luppy had the most shell-shocked look on his face conceivable as blood spurted from his right shoulder where nothing was attached beyond that point. It was as if he hadn't even registered the pain of the injury, instead concerning himself with just how it was possible. I'm in resurrection, and he could cut through my hierro without it? Only a stronger espada could do such a thing. The difference in strength between espada of just one number differential was highly significant, and though he would never think of such a thing, Luppy was a mere replacement espada, not originally intended to become one, but was used to fill a slot. He wasn't as strong as Sail Aporo Grands, even away from Las Noches where Sail Aporo was nearly unbeatable. A little too late he discovered that him fighting against Haydn as he was like a green newly promoted army officer leading a mission all on his own against a suicidal enemy that cared nothing for the consequences of their actions. To deal with a complete madman when you weren't willing to match the depths of his depravity you just needed more experience. Experience, cunning, and good tactics. It was as simple as that. Still stunned, Luppy didn't drift back into awareness until he felt Haydn tightly grab onto the body vest of bone that was the main portion of his resurrection. By the time he felt the tug it was too late to do anything about it. No. Raff. He screamed in pain when Haydn ripped it right off of him. It wasn't just there for aesthetics, it was actually a part of him, and Haydn bloodily tore it off of his body. The cries of anguish and pain were like music to Haydn's ears as blood splashed on his face. For as fun as it was to run through the hollows in Hueco Mundo, there was just something about the pained shouts of intelligent creatures that he enjoyed. Sick bastard, Jashin-sama will be pleased with this. A now thoroughly disarmed Luppy, bleeding from the shoulder where he no longer had an arm and from his chest and back where the bone vest that had been the origin of his tentacles was now gone, bleeding from deep holes where it had been rooted in his body, had officially had all of the fight drained out of him. Damn you. Luppy hissed hatefully as blood randomly spewed from the holes in his body and his shoulder. Damn you straight to hell, damn you straight to hell. You first. Haydn said with a wicked grin before letting loose a single swing of his scythe that cut Luppy clean in half at the waist. The last thing the falling espada saw as he hurtled to the ground from the air was a blood-soaked and battle-marked Haydn mockingly waving goodbye to him before it all went dark. XXX. Soul Society, South Rukongai District 79, Ichigo vs. Yami. Omida figured he was dead. Yami had torn apart that entire district trying to corner him. The Arankar was a full foot taller than Omida's, near 7 feet of height, and he was double his size, and it wasn't just for show the way Omida's was. He wasn't as physically imposing as his size would have initially let on, but Yami was, and then some. So when he found himself down with a grinning Yami about to crush his skull with a punch, he thought he was a dead man. Until he opened his eyes and saw his saving grace in a long black coat, with the spikiest orange hair he had ever seen. Wait, he knew that guy. That guy knocked him out with one punch that broke his Zanpakuto a few months ago. What was his name again? He didn't really catch it before he had gotten flattened. Kurosaki? Yeah? Ichigo said in his Bankai form, holding back Yami's punch with one single hand, much to the towering Espada's surprise and confusion. Great. I know your name. Omida said as he started scooting away on his backside to get his distance and get as far away from the two as he could. He didn't stand a chance if he got caught in that crossfire, and Soifan always told him that if he was going to be useless he should do it out of the way of people that are strong. You've got this then. That was an incredibly mean thing to say to one's lieutenant, but it could still be interpreted as good advice. Especially at a time like right then. Ignoring the pest that he could just find and squash later, Yami turned his attention to the skinny Shinigami that had stopped his attack. You're way stronger than that weakling, aren't you? Ichigo nodded without a second thought, and Yami let out a happy laugh. Suerte. Let's see what a real Shinigami can do in battle. Raising an eyebrow at the boisterous attitude of his to-be opponent, Ichigo idly wondered why so many hollows seemed to be excited to fight Shinigami. He knew that there was a hatred there, and that was understandable, but did hollows that fought Shinigami actually kill enough of them for many of them to think they had a chance? It didn't seem like it from his point of view. But as Yami lifted his hand for a second punch, he figured it wasn't his place to be a spiritual sociologist. He was a fighter, and if this was an Espada, it was time to see just how good of one he had become since training with Naruto's weird visored friends. Fighting bounce was one thing, combat with an Arankar was another. He got a quick answer to his question of just how good he was, when his Bankai Zanpakuto Tensa Zangetsu sliced right through Yami's arm at the forearm, cleaving it right off. Didn't these guys have skin that was hard to hurt or something? Trying to cut Haiden was a total pain, or so he had heard. Or was he just strong enough where it didn't matter against this guy? Wait, it might have been because Yami wasn't using his Resurrection and he had busted out his Bankai right from the start. Oops. Ichigo said as if he didn't know his own strength after Yami recoiled and started rampaging through the ruined district, cursing and smashing what was already broken. I thought you'd be stronger, but if you're the one that did this to this town, you deserve worse than just your arm being gone. He finished with a hard look in his eyes. Quickly channeling his pain and turning it to anger at the one that hurt him, Yami's dark gaze turned Ichigo's way once more. If everyone here was weak enough to let it happen to them, then good riddance. And with that he stomped on the ground hard enough to force a strong tremor that would have disrupted Ichigo's balance had he not jumped into the air to avoid it. This, however, left him an easy target for a cackling Yami who had a method of attack already in mind: Bala, hollow bullet. Caught in the air, Ichigo had to block as the first blast hit him. Hearing the contact explosion, Yami started blindly firing Bala after Bala with one hand into the blast smoke to make Ichigo suffer. Stupid brat. Yami grunted out as he continued to fire away aimlessly. He wasn't going to stop until he saw a puny Shinigami pissant drop to the ground. He might have been better advised to stop, because when the hand of said stupid brat grabbed his shoulder from behind, Yami was quite confused. Huh? Turning around, he took a heavy punch right to the face that flattened him and knocked him away from Ichigo through the remnants of another building. Not really the best idea on Ichigo's part, as he immediately shook out his hand that he had used to hit Yami. Okay, so that whole steel skin thing isn't just a catchy name after all. Ichigo said to himself as he could hear the bones in his right hand crack around as he tried to flex it out. As he was dealing with his own thing, he had to cover his eyes to protect them from the debris kicked up by a crater that had been blown into the ground right in front of him. From the crater, out jumped Soifan as she backflipped away from it rapidly, being followed doggedly by Grimjow, who looked to be having a whale of a time fighting against her. This is more like it. Do you see who the king is yet, or do you need a better example? His response was that he was somehow nicked on his open chest by Soifan's Zanpakuto, leaving a black butterfly mark there the size of the wound. One more touch in that spot and it doesn't matter if you were the king or not. Soifan said, standing not too far away from Ichigo in front of him, her shunku still active. You'd still be just as dead as a nobody. Though it wasn't visible if one wasn't looking for it, sweat was beading on her forehead from the effort she was exerting. Uruchi-sama was right. I really haven't mastered the shunku yet. But she needed it if she was going to wound the skin of an Arankar to form her signature technique's mark. Without shunku she simply wasn't generating enough force with her attacks to cut or puncture him with her blade. She'd already played that game without it. Grimjow scoffed at the thought that he had let Soifan cut him so casually and stepped forward to continue the battle when everyone stopped and paid attention to a sudden shift in the air. The sky tore open with a garganta as dozens of hollows of all shapes and sizes fell out and onto the ground all around the remnants of the district. A sneer came to Soifan's face at the unneeded intrusion, reinforcements perhaps. Though Grimjow paid her no mind and turned towards the sky, he began to scream angrily at the figure that emerged from it. He already knew which one of Aizen's lackeys were shoring up this little escapade, Tosen. Go back to Hueco Mundo? I don't need anyone's help to finish this by myself. In the sky stood the former Shinigami captain, the blind and dark-skinned Tosen Kaname alongside another Espada presumably. This Arankar had pale skin, messy black hair, a mask remnant that existed on half of his head like a broken and horned helmet. He wore the usual Arankar uniform for Aizen's army and his face was quite downcast with line markings going down from his eyes looking like tears. Finish this? Tosen said calmly with some authority in his voice, this is over now. You've lost all of your fraction. Your mission was to test the capabilities of our enemy to respond, not to lead Aizen-sama's soldiers to their deaths. He couldn't see the look on Grimjow's face, but with his senses he knew when he was being ignored and felt Grimjow turn away to get back to business with Soifan and maybe Ichigo too if he were dumb enough to step in. You'll return now. The mission is complete and so are your extracurricular activities. Grimjow rolled his eyes but figured that he had broken enough rules today and had seen enough to be better equipped to fight a captain next time around. All right, he said as he wiped away the blood on his chest from where Soifan cut him. At that point he grinned evilly and pointed his blood-covered hand out at Soifan and Ichigo as an unstable, crackling blue energy formed in it. Just kidding. Gran Rey Fero, Royal Halo Flas. From his hand, a massive and oppressively strong Zero was fired, speedily streaking through the air like a bolt at Ichigo and Soifan who went wide-eyed at the sheer power behind it. The attack fluctuated in size wildly, showing how thoroughly unstable it was as it blasted into them both and left a titanic trench in the ground from where Grimjow had been standing to far back from where he had been aiming. With a smirk he turned and saw that Yami had already gone up to retreat. The lesser hollows would make for a nice little parting gift for the Godii 13 to have to clean up for a while. Shoving his hands back into his pocket, Grimjow drifted up leisurely to retreat as Tosen had been waiting for him at the Garganta that his other Espada escort and Yami had already gone through. Looking quite pleased with himself, Grimjow stopped before going back through the portal. There, if they survive that then maybe you can say they're worth something. But if not, you just wasted my time by making me go back to Las Noches. Before Grimjow could move past him after having spoken his piece, Tosen grabbed him by the arm and turned him around before silently pointing at Soifan's mark that was still on his chest. With that, the justice-fueled former Shinigami captain went through the portal and left Grimjow behind as he glared back to the end of where his trench had been carved with his powerful Zero before he too retreated within, allowing it to close behind him. XXX. The surrounding forested landscape that sat around the South Rukongai 79th district had been devastated and now had a brand new trench that could be later patched up and called a road, or perhaps could be converted to an irrigation ditch. Well, not anymore since there was no life left in the broken-down district anymore. And at the end of that trench, having been blown all the way back there from the force of Grimjow's sudden act of violence, there happened to be both Ichigo and Soifan, both of them looking severely damaged and burned from the Gran Rey Zero, with one significant change to Ichigo that helped him stand up to the move. Ow. Ichigo said in his distorted voice as his hollow mask adorned his face. The power then faded and his mask broke to keep Soifan from getting a good chance to identify what it was. You're alive and well, aren't you, Soifan? With the battle seemingly over, Soifan finally released her shunku and had to fight to keep her knees from shaking. Don't use my name without an honorific Kurosaki, she said as she surveyed the devastation of the entire district and the portion of forest that they were driven back into. She had felt the odd power from Ichigo, but decided that grilling him about it directly at the moment wouldn't do much for her, so those were the Espada. They were strong. Grimjow was very, very strong. Ichigo had to release a quick Getsuga Tensho and Soifan had to let loose a quick Kidu Blast to prevent themselves from being blown apart by Grimjow's sneak attack. Yes. Well, they were two of them anyway. Making his appearance with Tessai at his side, Urahara walked over and surveyed the scene as well. Meanwhile Ichigo just stared at him with a twitching eye. You opened the portal and came through right along with us. So tell me why you didn't think it was a good enough idea to get off of your ass and help us out. Generals don't fight. Urahara quipped, pulling out his fan to cover his amused smile. That's what the underlings are for, underling. Before Ichigo could jump at him to try and strangle him, he changed his tone. Koga's helping Chad contain the hollows that were released here, but there are too many going in too many directions for the two of them to get them all. If we don't move fast, they'll reach a different district with an actual population and begin killing Soul Society denizens. We still have work to do tonight. Ichigo nodded and started looking around as his ability to sense Ryatsu still left much to be desired. He only began moving when Urahara and Tessai pointed in the general direction that Koga and Chad couldn't cover and split between the two of them. That left Urahara to direct his attention to the glare that was directed at his back by Soifan. You know? Yuruchi doesn't stay at my shop anymore. She lives at Naruto's base, so I don't know why you're still so hostile to me all the time. Be pissed off at Naruto. Uzumaki does indeed make me sick, but I still blame you for Yuruchi-sama leaving the Soul Society to begin with. Soifan reasoned with him, getting a sigh out of Urahara. That's not important right now though. Urahara nodded in agreement to her statement. Right. What's important is that you can't even walk right now. That's not true at all. Soifan disputed with a glare only to get Urahara smiling back at her and pointing at the ground in front of him, directing her to walk over there to prove it. I would never willingly choose to be that close to anyone like you unless I have a good reason, such as ending your wretched life. Okay, Urahara said with a smirk. Even a blind man could see that he was about to tease Soifan now that he was certain she couldn't retaliate. If you can walk over to me without collapsing, I'll let you kick the crap out of me until you get tired, and I'll make Yuruchi come back to the Siriidii to visit more often. I'll even throw in a tied-up Naruto delivered to your office, but I probably won't need to do that to make him go. Soifan just narrowed her eyes at Urahara since she knew that she probably wouldn't make it. What in the world makes you think that I give a damn whether or not Uzumaki shows his face? So does that mean that you aren't going to try it? XXX. Human world, downtown Karakura town. At first she heard voices. Sung-sun was quite certain that they had been killed by Gaara's attack. But as she became aware of the fact that she was waking up and that not only was she alive, both Mila Rose and Apache were as well, she opened her eyes and weakly sat up from where she was laying on the ground in the street. No longer were any of them in their resurrection forms because of their complete lack of energy to maintain it, and every last one of them were sporting telltale signs of just what kind of number Gaara did on them with his last move. A splitting and homing Zero Blast? How in the world did he manage such manipulation of his Ryu-Ryoku without using his true form? But as she looked around, not too far away she saw Gaara standing still shirtless as they had destroyed his robe in the battle. Only here he was facing off against some kind of Shinigami, a strange-looking man with a large afro who was shakily holding up his Zanpakuto at Gaara. I know what you are. You're members of Aizen Susuk's army. For the last time, Shinigami-san, that is not the case. Gaara said as if he were having to repeat himself to a child. I am on your side, and as you can see my opponents are quite thoroughly defeated. You can put your weapon away and carry on with your evening. Why did the Siriidii station a Shinigami in Karakura town after what happened with Rukia and with them knowing that Ichigo was there to boot? And why'd it have to be a weak one like this person? Kurumadani Zenisuke wasn't foolish enough to ignore the amount of power he could feel from Gaara, but while he knew of the group known as Equilibrium, he wasn't about to believe that an Arrancar was an ally, even if they were a fringe group, and if Gaara did look like he was telling the truth, because he definitely looked as if he had been in quite the fight. But he didn't look like he was leaving, so with a roll of his eyes Gaara quickly flared his Ryatsu as high as he could without using his Resurrection. Leave or get yourself hurt, please. If I was a member of Aizen's army or not, would it matter during a fight? With that being said, Gaara feigned a sudden hostile move in Zenisuke's direction and watched the Shinigami hightail it out of there. He didn't even use Shuinpa. Maybe he just couldn't? Then he definitely made the right decision in running away. He couldn't have stood up against Apache, Mila Rose, or Sung-sun anyway, even if he had been the one to fight them. Now that the Shinigami interloper was gone with urine possibly trailing down his leg, Gaara turned back around to find that one of his previous opponents had just come to go home. He said simply before walking away. Sung-sun just looked at him as if he were insane. You're willing to let us go? Why would I still consider you a threat? Gaara asked rhetorically as he stopped leaving to address her. I defeated all three of you at your full power without even using my resurrection. Even if doing so again would make any kind of difference, you don't have enough energy to do it and your friends are still unconscious. He then noticed a portal open up in the sky and pointed at it. Your way home, I presume? Take your partners and go. Since she was the only one awake, Gaara's assumption that Sung Sun had the strength to get herself, Apache, and Mila Rose home was correct as he watched her stand up and gather the ladies over her shoulders. Sparing the stoic redhead one last glance to make sure that he wasn't trying to bait her and attack her from behind later, Sung Sun saw him just impassively staring with his arms crossed over his chest where his hollow hole sat, waiting patiently for her to depart. You know that it's not very smart to let us go like this. Gaara's lips quirked almost unnoticeably in a bit of a smile as he responded, if that's the case then I think my best friend's influence is rubbing off on me. He never was very smart either, you see. Sung Sun spared a slight chuckle as she continued to eye Gaara for a while longer. I believe I understand where you're coming from if you pay attention to the company I keep. Goodbye then, she said before quickly bolting into the sky out of view with the use of her sonido. Gaara just watched her go through the portal that had seemingly randomly been opened. Well, at least he got a bit of a laugh out of one of the pretty Arrancar ladies that had just tried to kill him. Oh, he didn't care. If he didn't have people trying to kill him he'd never have met anyone at all. But then he thought of something weird that he had overlooked until his enemies had departed. Why was the Garganta opened right above Mother Base? Without another thought he sped across town towards the hollow portal to find out just what was going on at his new home. XXX. Moments before, Mother Base, rooftop. Harabelle simply waited for the newly reawakened adult Neliel to respond to her, but she continued to look up at her with the same indecipherable look on her face. But she was a patient woman, and thus she was willing to wait for her predecessor's response, whatever that may be. On the surface of the roof, Nell's eyes panned to Dondochaka and Pesh, and then to Jinta and Ururu. She then closed them and spoke to the calm Trace Espada hovering above. I would like to thank you for at the very least not killing anyone here. Each of the people that fought you are my friends, so I can appreciate your mercy. I don't kill needlessly. Harabelle said, your friends were in the way of my mission so I simply removed them, but killing them was never to be an intention of mine. If we merely kill at a whim then what makes us any different from the hollows that we evolved from? Nell nodded and Harabelle drifted down to the ground. As long as things were civil, Aizen-sama wishes for your return to his army. I remember you saying that to my smaller self. With that being said, she looked down at the Zanpakuto that had materialized in its sheath that sat in her hand. She held it up and drew it enough to gaze at the steel of the blade shining in the moonlight before a sigh passed from her lips, and I'll have to decline on that front. I'm not returning to Hueco Mundo to return to the Arrancar army. Going native apparently was the theme of every Arrancar that the Espada seemed to run into these days. There was Haydn, Gaara, and now Nell. None of them were on Aizen's side after Neliel's declaration to decline a return. But Harabelle just didn't get it. Why now? Neliel had been perhaps the most reliable Arrancar in her time in the Espada. Why would you stay here instead of return to Las Noches? You had always been trustworthy and respectful of Aizen-sama. He was the one that gave her the powers as an Arrancar that she enjoyed the use of. True enough, but only if that superior has shown that they are worthwhile to fight for. Nell gestured to the unconscious Dondochaka and Pesh. What would make Aizen seem worthwhile now? We were attacked and gravely wounded by two of his elites under his command, and not only did he never try to locate us, he never tried to find the reason for it or where we were. I won't sacrifice myself and my fraction for a leader that won't stand up for such a grave injustice against his loyal subjects. There was that word again, sacrifice. And the fact of the matter was that Neliel wasn't willing to stick her neck out for Aizen if he didn't even seem to care if she had been gone for several years prior to then. From the feel of her Ryatsu, Nell was still more powerful than many of the current Espada, definitely more so than the bottom half, but she was deemed unimportant for that long when it wasn't a simple task of finding her once her energy signature was masked due to her injury. Now that it was convenient and Aizen knew where she was, it was a simple matter to dispatch someone to retrieve her. So she was only worth searching for when it was convenient. Not really something that one would look towards when looking for endearing reasons to fight for someone. So you'll fight for them instead? Harabelle asked, no real expression on her mostly covered face other than raising one blonde eyebrow curiously. At that point Nell just smiled serenely. That's the thing. I don't think I'll have to fight at all if I were to remain here. In Hueco Mundo, in Las Noches as a part of Aizen's army I would be required to, but here I don't have to. Even if I remain like this, with my powers returned to me, if I chose not to fight I believe I'd be allowed to live peacefully. You believe that's an option for you? For someone of your power? Of course it is. Have you not sensed the Ryatsu of your own enemies? 2 Espada-class Arrancar, 2 former Shinigami captains, a 3rd Shinigami with incredible power and potential, and a regular human that has lived long enough that his power is ripened and potent enough to stand against the supernatural. Along with her analysis of all of the other powerful presences that her child form had been around since coming to the human world, it was clear to her, I'm not needed to fight by anyone here. An Arrancar not fighting? Being allowed to be left alone? That was impossible. If Nell lingered in the human world, even if Equilibrium would indeed leave her alone as she felt that they would, the Siriidii would sense her presence and would never let her just be. Right? But then, Haydn and Gaara were there too. They had to have been there for at least 2 months and they had remained off of the radar for the most part. So was it actually possible? I don't like being used. What kind of fool would I be if I went back to Aizen? Nell said with a pitiful shake of her head before she set herself in a defensive stance, so do you plan on killing me now that I've turned you down? Tensing up when she saw Haribel raise her sword, she calmed down when she saw the current Trace Espada simply place the weapon away in the sheath on her back. If you're not going to fight on this side or the other I don't have any reason to consider you my enemy. A relieved Nell sheathed her sword as well before Haribel spoke again. That may not be the case later, but for now I wasn't directed to do anything to you if you decline to come back with me. She lifted her hand into the sky and flared up her Ryatsu before a Garganta opened up in the air. A quick use of Sonido placed her in the sky and a moment later she was joined by her Fraction, only one of whom actually happened to be conscious before they all left. XXX. With Naruto, vicinity of Oriheim's apartment. Impatience was clearly expressed on Naruto's face as he continued to watch Jin and Shinji's battle in the sky all around him. I thought you said that you didn't want to fight anyone strong around here. He said to Jin once the man stopped to clash blades against Shinji Sanpakuto. Shinji completely stole his opponent. What the hell? Jin showed up outside of his employee's home and started throwing down against him. Since when was it cool to switch up dance partners like that? I didn't. Jin admitted to the sagely warrior as he struggled against Shinji, but he does, and apparently that's all that matters right now. Not feeling sorry for cutting into his friend's fight one bit, Shinji shoved Jin away and his Ryatsu quickly spiked as his pharaoh-looking hollow mask formed on his face and the sclera of his eyes turned completely black. You're lucky that I can't blow you away without taking a chunk out of the town. Jin's eyes opened a little bit in befuddlement before closing again in their usual expression, lucky me. Wonderweiss. He then noticed that the intended place that Wonderweiss had planned on transporting himself to with Sonido already had Naruto there, and he had Wonderweiss wrapped in a bear hug. Oh, you are just the worst kind of person. Are you kidding? I'm not taking my eyes off of this kid. Naruto said, holding on tightly to Wonderweiss in his sage mode state as the young Arrancar wriggled desperately to get free in vain. The minute I do that he'll start shoving hands through people's backs and whatnot. He stopped ranting when he felt Wonderweiss tense up and wondered what was going on with the kid when he unleashed a horrible, deafening high-pitched wail. Every pane of glass, even on the windshields of cars, shattered for miles and miles in every direction. Shinji's hollow mask broke from the sheer noise that he was standing very close to. Even Naruto's grip involuntarily loosened on the childlike Arrancar due to the balance-crushing noise hitting him straight in the eardrums. He clutched his ears as Wonderweiss made his way back towards Jin while a rip appeared in the sky. What the hell was that supposed to be? Shinji asked, still using his hollow powers even though his mask had been broken. What? Naruto yelled as he was unable to hear the visored or aptly read his lips due to the ringing in his ears due to being at ground zero of Wonderweiss and his auditory attack. Jin had Wonderweiss safely tucked under one arm as he waved at both Naruto and Shinji. That was a fun little encounter, we'll have to do it again sometime. Hadu number 32, Ukeisen, Way of Destruction number 32, Yellow Fire Flash. Suddenly firing a wide, arcing horizontal blast of yellow energy from his Zanpakuto as a cover, he then made a break for the escaped Garganta while Naruto and Shinji busied themselves with blocking the attack that pushed them both back, crashing into the roof below. Bye-bye now. Jin said as he pulled an extremely white cloth from within his own sleeve. It wrapped around Jin and Wonderweiss and coiled tightly before it all vanished from their sight along with Jin and his small and confused-looking charge well in hand. Naruto stood up and dusted himself off, picking building debris out of his hair and mouth before cleaning his ear out. What? He yelled out again in a deaf manner as he hadn't really heard Jin's parting message. His hearing was starting to clear up though. Man, I hate fighting in the air. He commented to himself, if we were on the ground where moving my legs actually mattered for speed, that would have never hit me. A grunt came from Shinji as he got himself out of some rubble himself. His hollow powers faded away and his clothes messed up as well. I'm used to fighting in weird situations really, especially with my Zanpakuto, so it never bothered me. What did bother him was that Aizen's little buddy from back in the day Jin stuck his nose back into Karakura town. What was he here for? To see the sights apparently. Naruto said sarcastically as he located the Raijin no Ken he had disposed of tactically earlier to try and gain an advantage over Jin. He had allowed his Sage Mode and Rinnegan to drop since the battle was over and since Shinji was casual, thus there were no hostile signatures around. Shinji just deadpanned a stare at his fellow blonde as he watched him pick his empty sword hilt up and safely pocket it. No really. What was he here for? Naruto just shrugged in response. Okay, next question on the pop quiz. Why didn't you use that weird inner power of yours to take on Jin? Other than the fact that I didn't want to turn this part of town into a crater? You're a crappy liar. You know better than to say that. You showed it to us to get us to trust you when we met and you used it before to beat down that one Espada and his dozens of followers, I remember. When I use the hollow mask most of my abilities are Kidu-based, so I would have had to tear this place apart to win. Your excuse would be? Looking at Shinji's skeptical expression on his face, Naruto sighed as he walked his way back over. My control over the Jubi isn't exactly what you would say safe and secure right now. If it's really on the verge of waking up, I don't want to risk it, especially in the middle of Karakura town. Nobody would have a fighting chance of surviving it. If that happened, he might as well allow Aizen to create the Uken, because the Jubi's initial release would kill just as many people. Not to mention how many more would die within mere days. Oh come on now. Shinji said, patting Naruto on the shoulder only to see the usual boisterous man not even crack a smile at the friendly gesture. Really? It wasn't a joke or an embellishment. This clearly wasn't any laughing matter as far as Naruto was concerned. Yeah, I'm telling you Dashta. He then stopped as he felt something in his pocket where he put his sword hilt. He went wide-eyed when he pulled from his possession a metal pendant with his clan symbol emblazoned upon it. Oh hell, Orihime. With great quickness, Naruto rushed towards her apartment and stood on the window corner of her bedroom that had been shattered by Wonderwise's supersonic attack. A sigh of relief came from him when he saw that she was still asleep, as if a battle hadn't been fought in her neighborhood right outside of her doorstep. All of the glass from the busted windows in her room littered every inch of the floor, but not her bed. Lucky. He really needed to try and get her and possibly Chad as well to move out of their apartments and into Mother Base. How was anyone supposed to watch out for them from a dozen miles away? At least Yuryu and Ichigo had the excuse that they had kick-ass parents when push came to shove, and Tatsuki lived right by Ichigo as well. These kids are going to be the death of me. Naruto audibly complained to Shinji, who seemed to be visibly disappointed that Orihime was slumbering fully clothed. What a way to kill a possible fantasy scenario. The leader of the Vizards watched dejectedly as Naruto checked Orihime over for any injuries or in case any surreptitious things had been done to her by an Arrancar agent on the sly while they had been fighting outside. Damn it Naruto, give me a break here. You couldn't have at least undressed her before you tucked her in? Help a guy out, would you? He then found himself kicked in the face off of the windowsill from Naruto. XXX. Mother Base. Imagine Gaara's surprise when he returned to the base inside of his Jigai and found a full-grown and very lovely woman with long green hair wearing a torn-up gown that left very little to the imagination, keeping watch over the injured but still very alive group of Jinta, Yururu, Pesh, and Dondo Chaka. She then noticed his presence and greeted him with a calm look and a nod of acknowledgement to go along with a small smile. On a side note, he was so glad that Naruto woke him up out of that desert. But then he took note of the skull mask on her head, and the blush-looking mark on her face, and the scar going down her forehead. Those were things that were associated with Nell. And then he remembered what he knew about the girl losing her powers due to an injury received in the past. So that was the real Nell? Gaara simply approached her and waited alongside her in the room holding the injured for someone to return that could help them. He wished to speak to her, but he didn't really know what to say. Maybe, what made her take that appearance? Or maybe what the hell had happened to get the others so beaten up? Those would have made sense to ask, but at the time the former Kazekage was at a loss when it came to how he would approach asking her questions. Perhaps he was just completely startled and shell-shocked at that woman actually being Nell, the little girl that had been running around the base and Urahara's shop for the past month. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on whose perspective was taken into account, the option was taken out of his hands when all of a sudden Nell reverted to a child once more while the two of them were sitting and waiting. She simply popped back into a sleeping child as if she had been in a henge or something. Just poof, and that was that. Okay, what the hell just happened? That was a total mindfuck because once again now that she was a child, Gaara could barely sense her, while before her presence had been exceedingly difficult to ignore or set aside at all. It was as if someone hit a light switch and the room went dark where before the entire place was illuminated by a single bulb. What kind of injury did that to anyone? Haydn strolled into the room at that moment, looking quite pleased and satisfied with himself and covered in a significant amount of blood, some of it his but most of it not. He noticed the injured people, then the sleeping Nell, and then he noticed the very subtle look of confusion and surprise on Gaara's face. What did I miss?